Well, unfortunately, in the state of Arizona, as we have learned, they passed a law that says if one child is at risk, you remove all the children.
Okay.
That was Bill Montgomery and Jan Brewer in the CPS task force to improve it. One of the recommendations was to remove all children, and in those recommendations is actually contrary to any grandparents' right. They've done the misperception that if one child is in danger, all children are in danger. Mm-hmm. And consequently, for the child's best interest, we must remove them all. The child's best interest is normally leaving the children with the parents, even if it's questionable homes. It's still better for the kids and the outcome of the children to leave them with their parents than to remove them. Mm-hmm. So this phrase, in the child's best interest, is a key that is used to get money.
Explain that process. How is it that they are making money?
Well, there's two laws that have been passed in the federal government. One was back in the 70s, and the other one, I believe, Clinton signed. Both of them were to help CPS and kids that were in trouble. Laying the whole thing out, what it comes down to is when they remove a child and they say it's for the child's best interest, the state gets money. Get a lot of money. And they have only a certain period of time to place those kids in permanent homes by federal law. If they're under a year, they only have 6 months within Child Protective Service. By federal law, they have them in permanent placement. They have to have it done in 6 months.
6 months.
And they will stall every which way they can, so you pass that 6 month time. If you pass it, the kid's up for adoption.
Let's say you have 10 cases where a child is removed from their home by CPS. What percentage would you say is possibly a case where that child really, really needed to be placed elsewhere?
The federal level, I think it's like 10%. And they take 90% of the kids shouldn't even be in custody. They said only 50% of the children are actually returned back to the parents.
So how do they work that out with making a lot of money?
Most of it is through the Medicaid. Mm-hmm. Is it Medicaid?
Yeah, Access and Medicaid.
Access and Medicaid. Every service they receive gets financing. It's an average of 35 people are employed from every child that's abducted. I use that word purposely.
Yes.
Initially, you have the foster care or the group care placement. Those people get paid a monthly fee to have the child in the home. They also get an allowance for the kids to have clothing and other essentials. Then they give the kids are supposed to actually get an allowance, but in many times the kids aren't actually receiving the allowance. Then you have every time they get moved from one home to another, they have to go see a doctor. So you have the medical professional in there. They also have to see a dentist. So now they have to go to a dentist every time they get moved to a different home. Then they have the therapy because they want all the kids to be in therapy. So now you got a therapist involved, and you have a manager that's in charge of the therapy sessions. And you have the case manager for CPS, plus their boss. It just goes on and on and on. Everything is another agency that gets involved that's supposed to be providing services to help the children. And they all get paid.
And most of the money comes from the federal government. Okay. When or if it goes to an adoption, the adopted parents get paid. They get tax breaks on it, and their legal fees are paid by the feds to get those kids into a permanent home other than their parents. And there's a residual income that continues to go to the state. Tom Horne's agency, the major portion of his agency, which is the Attorney General's office, State Attorney General's, is in the business of supporting CPS. That is his biggest department. So his biggest amount of funds that comes in is prosecuting cases against parents to remove children. That's his biggest job.
This is one of the most lucrative businesses in Arizona.
There's no way to prove the numbers, but I could very well state that if you have a private attorney and you want your kids back, you're going to pay $75,000 to $100,000 for that private attorney. For every attorney you have. The amount of money that's spent based on Well, if you think about it this way, there's 15,000 kids in the system right now?
Just under 15,000.
15,000 kids in the system. And each one of those services and all of that piece is probably $10,000
Per
a
month, okay.
And they keep those numbers running. There's a lot of people that are involved when you think about it, from parent partners to services to classes that the court makes you take. It just keeps going on and on and on as to the hoops that the state makes you jump through to prove that you were a good parent. You got to understand, you're guilty of being a bad parent. If the allegations are true or not, if you're involved or not, as soon as CPS picks this up, you are guilty. And you must prove yourself worthy of getting your children back.
What is your background knowledge on the legitimacy of CPS?
Well, I think the intentions, again, an intention of the law that was supposed to help children because there are children that are at risk. There are children that live in abused families.
Right.
It should be removed. You hear the horror stories.
Sure.
But I think, once again, it has been abused by the system and the bureaucrats to turn it into a social justice kind of system where we think that you're a bad parent and we are going to place the children in what we deem is a better home. Many times what these foster parents are doing is they want to adopt children. And so at the orientation, this was part of what was discussed. They were asking, the questions were, well, what's the likelihood of me being able to adopt a child? Mm-hmm. They're all looking for the younger children under 5 years old that they can potentially adopt. Mm-hmm. So they're not interested in helping the child that really needs temporary housing in order for the family to solve their issues. They are looking for placement, and then if they get placed, they've got a 50-50 chance of adopting that child. And then the state will pay for their attorney's fees and all the costs for them to get the adoption. So they don't have to dish it out through a private agency. Now they get it covered by the government.
We have to look at our past in Arizona. Our former governor, Napolitano, went after government funding for child protective services. They had grants out to expand the facilities, and she applied for and received these very large grants because we had such a problem. Well, after they got them built, they didn't have the housing. They didn't have enough people coming into these centers. So they lowered the standards within CPS's own documentation on what was reason for removal, neglect, abuse, and so forth. It's not in law as to what the state has to say is a reason for abuse. It's within the DES policies. So they lowered those thresholds down so they could bring more kids in, because if they didn't bring the kids into the system, they weren't using the facilities that they got government funding for, and they'd have to pay the government back the money that they were granted.
I haven't even seen the entire building, but it's 2 stories and it's huge. And they have to justify why they spent all the money on that building.
And please understand that these local agencies are under contract with CPS, and part of their contract is not to badmouth CPS. So if you have the tendencies to voice and you're boisterous, they'll support, but they can't, the parent aid or these agencies that are helping you, they can't get on your side. They can't back you up and say, yeah, it's like that. Because then the agency itself becomes in trouble of losing a very lucrative government contract. I can tell you from CPS's own people that right now we're removing 35 children a day in Arizona. We're staying pretty steady at 15,000 within the system.
Per year?
Well, they're maintaining about 15,000 children in foster care.
At any one time.
In custody at one time.
Oh, okay.
So when the grandchildren were taken, at that particular time, it was around 11,000 children that were taken, that were in custody at that time. That was last August of 2012. By the end of the year, that had risen to 15,000, and they have been maintaining about 15,000 for the past year. So as they return children, they are obviously taking more children to keep it at that same 15,000. So that must be some magical number that they have, that they can handle. I know that they're begging for people to be foster parents because they say they don't have enough space. They say children are being taken and they're sleeping in the offices in the CPS office because they have no place to put them.
The 15,000 children, you said Arizona alone.
Yes.
Out of that 15,000, what percentage would you say actually become adopted, and what happens to those who are not adopted?
50% are returned home. The other 50% either get adopted or get shuffled around. If you go through a divorce in Arizona, you have to take a class. If you get violent, this will be called, CPS will be called, the children will be taken by CPS. You'll have to battle it out within the courts. And they say every time a child has a visitation with the parent, that is one incident of PTSD. So you are putting these children, and usually they have weekly visits with a parent, through an incident of PTSD until the child is returned home. Well, look what it's doing to our military. And we're putting children through this that can't understand it.
Have you ever heard the term, it takes a village to raise a
Yeah.
child? Well, that's backwards. It takes a family to raise a child with the village's support. Well, these people in CPS believe that it takes the village, it takes the state to raise the children, not the parents. So when they see parents that are not conforming to whatever personal beliefs on how a child is to be raised, that's a bad parent. That parent shouldn't have their kids. So there's no thought about culture, there's no thought about upbringing, there's no thought about any of the rest of the stuff. When these calls go into a call center, there's a guideline that they're supposed to follow, and they're supposed to rank it and say what danger the stuff is. And it's very laid out as to what it is. If CPS wants to take the child, they'll rank it correctly. They'll mark the stuff correctly, and then they'll rank it as high risk. And as soon as the judge sees the ranking as high risk, he okays the order. Even though the report doesn't qualify for the high risk. So the initial call center is manipulated to get these kids taken. And then we were talking about Bill Montgomery and the investigations. These police investigations, the investigations they do, is only to the point of backing up CPS's claim. Not to the point of finding out what the truth is, finding out if the kids are in danger or not. It's just to justify the taking of the children.
Well, they don't even listen to the children. If the children in their interviews say, I feel safe at home, I feel safe with my parents, I have had no problems, they don't listen to the children, they take them anyway. They're making stuff up.
Every attorney we've talked to about CPS, their first comment is, they lie.
So the attorneys say openly that the CPS workers are lying.
Yes. And you've heard the term CYA?
Yes.
Cover your
Yeah.
It
agency.
means cover your agency.
I see.
Okay?
I see.
So when you see the court documents that they give, I would say 80% plus is a fabrication. Many times has no
80%.
justification.
Oh, yes.
In fact, they are allegations that could be of danger. They're just an allegation, but there's no fact behind the allegation. See, you got to understand here, we're in family court. The level of evidence is the lowest level of evidence on our court system, meaning second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand, fifth-hand rumor can be used in a court of law against you. You don't have to have any evidence to show it. You just have to have a basic probable cause.
I see.
And it can be from an anonymous source. We have dealt with that many times. Well, we got this anonymous letter that states this might be happening. Anonymous? Who's anonymous? So how can you even justify, or how can you defend yourself against an anonymous person that claims something happened, but you can't question the person to find out if in fact you were even at that particular place or time when they claim you were.
But they'll use that against you?
But they will use that against you.
You agree with Nancy Schaefer why it must be dismantled. What would be your top reasons why CPS must be replaced with an organization that actually does protect children?
My top reason is I believe it's unconstitutional. Without going through a process that is supposed to be protected by our Constitution. You should have to go through the legal process first, and they should have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you have done something that is putting your children in danger or harm, that they have the right to take them in the first place.
It breaks the 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment.
Sure.
You have more ability to protect your home and your dog than you do your children. No place in the Constitution does it give the United States government, or the state governments for that matter, the ability to break up a family. If due process is followed, it could be law that says that you are not fit to raise your children.
Exactly.
But under no circumstance does the Constitution allow for CPS to come in and take children without due process. And that is what they're doing. And they do it because it's for the children's safety. You know, we have to save the children. But they can't even identify which children are at risk. So what do? Since they can't identify them, we need to take them all. Here's the biggest thing. If you look at the demographics that they take, they look for people who can't defend themselves.
What would you say those factors typically are? What would be some
Income.
of those? Low income,
Color,
color, as in primarily Black, Latino, Native American?
yes,
Okay.
okay?
Age of the children,
Age of the
they're
children,
looking for the young ones.
Okay, so 0 to,
5.
5.
that's their prime, the
That's-
Those
pick
are
up the
adoptable.
crop.
Those
Those
are
are
adoptable. They can make money off of those.
Compared.
The other
Go
people
ahead.
that are at risk are their children that have learning disabilities, autistic, people that believe in naturopathic medicine, people that have their children by a midwife instead of in a hospital, people that don't immunize on a
Those are-
regular schedule. Those people are all at risk. And homeschoolers.
And homeschoolers. Let's break this a second and change subject a little bit. Let's talk about Obamacare and Common Core
Yes,
and how these things fit together.
yeah.
In Common Core, I don't know if people are aware of Common Core, but that's the new education system that's being adopted across the country. So in Common Core, I went to the meeting with the school, and the principal was explaining what the school's version of Common Core is. So they're all proud that they're going to be able to track everything your child does. They're going to see the progress that they're making in class. And this principal bragged that she has an entire wall or room that has all these statistics about each child in that room. So if you want to go see it, you can see it, but you can't see the details on each child, the names of the child. So now they can track exactly how your child is doing in school. They also collect other information by asking the children questions which the children would not understand. You know, we need a story about your family so we can understand your family. Who do you live with? These kinds of things. So they start asking them these, what seems to be normal questions to their child, but they collect this data. Now, if a child isn't being successful in school, and they see them falling behind, under Obamacare, it says that if a child isn't making progress in school or is falling behind, they have a right to come out and do a home visit under the Obamacare laws. Now you end up with the state coming out to check out your home because your child's falling behind in school, and how easy is it for them at that point to get CPS involved and remove your
And
child?
which part of the Constitution would you say that violates?
There's nothing constitutional about any of that. They
Thank you.
first shouldn't be collecting information like that from the school system.
Especially from a child.
Obamacare, we already know we don't believe in Obamacare and what they're collecting on that. What right do they have under a medical policy even to say, I have a right to come out without your consent to do a home visit?
Yeah. But they did it very, very neatly in both Obamacare and in Common Core. The government isn't the one gathering the information. It's a private company that's gathering the information.
Owned
But
by-
the Supreme Court has ruled that any information gathered by a private company can be acquired by the federal government without a warrant. So while the federal government is not holding that data, they have clean access to the data. They just take a
Please.
peek if they need to.
I see. What other reasons?
Well, I think they're losing the whole moral values and setup of our original intent of our country. The country is based on a foundation of God and family, and we're losing it. And by them taking the children and saying the government has the best interest in the child children in mind, and that they're the best ones to determine where this child should live, just violates our basic foundation of the country. If a family has a problem, who should better be taking care of the children but grandparents or an aunt or an uncle? We should be keeping the family together regardless of what's going on with that family. Is it really the government? Should the government be stepping in and taking over this family? Or should we be bringing resources in from our churches or our community to provide the support for those families so they can be successful? Why are we destroying the family? We need to try to make the family stronger, and we're not doing that.
We're doing the exact opposite. The fix to this is multifaceted. We have to continue in the legislature to work to get changes. We have to create support systems in the community that are not government support systems, if it be through churches or through private agencies, where parents that are in trouble can go and get help, because we are being attacked.
Right.
This has been going on in the United States now since the beginning of the 1900s.
How did it enter in that time?
That's when the communist movement in Russia and the United States both started. And there was a lot of changes to the Constitution that was made in 1913 to make inroads, and there was more made in 1930 to make inroads towards a communistic, socialistic, communistic agenda. And they knew the first time they made a pass at this, the two things that stopped them were family and God. So they went after both of them, to discredit God, to discredit the churches, to break up our basic foundations in this country. And then they had to take the family out and make government the family. And they've done that through the public school systems. So this isn't, when you're dealing with CPS, you're dealing with the razor edge of communism into our neighborhoods. You have to understand how big this octopus is.
Oh, it is.
Okay. This snake, whatever you want to call it, it feeds on itself. And it goes all the way up in the judicial system, into the judges, and into the bar associations. So there have been cases within the United States that if a attorney goes after CPS, they're disbarred. So you find very few attorneys that are willing to go after that part of the mechanism.
They threaten when you do court documents and stuff, or you have to do court motions. They tell CPS, well, the judge will order, you have to have your documents in within 7 days before the hearing, so then other people can respond to them. But CPS doesn't do that. But this is common. For instance, the kids being homeschooled and being taken from public school. That is so obvious that that is a lie. At what point are you charged with a crime? I can't lie in court documents without being charged with a crime. Why can CPS? Why is the Attorney General Office permitted to continue presenting false information that they know is wrong?
They hide information. You have good reports that are coming in that'll help you get the children. The AG's office won't bring them forward. So we don't have it yet. They'll make excuses for it. They'll push the legal standards out. And the thing is, they're part of the government. They don't get held accountable. Right. There is no agency to hold them accountable, and the only way you can audit CPS is through a legislative audit. So the state hides behind protecting the children to cover your agency. They can do whatever they want. They can hide the documents. The legislatures can't see it to see what's really going on. The police have no right to go into it. So who's going to enforce anything against that agency? Nobody. CPS is completely self-regulating. You can't even file a petition or a complaint against it from any source without it going right back to the case managers.
So it's sort of like if you had a problem and you went to the Godfather, he basically would say, go see the Mafia.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the Mafia would say, well, if you have a problem, go see the Godfather.
Yes.
Parents of these kids are always in the dark. The other thing you've got to understand is if you try to buck the system, they'll buck you right down into the ground. You know, so if you're into these court hearings and you're complaining and you're trying to point out their flaws, CPS can be vicious as far as their retaliation that they do against the families. Because let's face it, this is a kidnapping. They're holding your children basically for ransom. And if you don't jump through every hoop that they do, they will keep them. And even if you do jump through them all, you still may keep them.
One lady that we had met in one of our classes, and she had 3 autistic children. The one was becoming a teenager, and he was becoming a little bit more than she could handle, and she didn't want to put her other kids at risk. She didn't want them harmed. So she went to CPS for help. They took the 3 children. She fought and fought and fought to get these children back. Now, she eventually got the 3 children back, but 2 were returned in boxes. They had been murdered in foster care. So that's one of them that happened in Arizona.
This isn't an Arizona problem. This isn't a U.S. problem. This is a world issue on all industrialized countries that have any type of socialism within their governmental system. We're seeing the same progression happen in different countries. So when you see news articles of what happened in Ireland, those are just as valid as what could happen here. It may not be to that point yet, but we're quickly going there. So if we don't start changing our philosophies back to our roots, of the original American types of constitutional roots, where do your rights come from? From
Right.
God.
Yes.
The Bill of Rights is there to protect our rights. Benjamin Franklin stated, without the moral values of Christian beliefs, a republic can't exist.
Exactly.
And we've been having that torn away from us. Only 10% of the kids that age out of CPS go to college, and only 1% of them graduate college. The greatest majority of children that age out of CPS end up one of 3 ways: homeless, dead, or in jail.
The greatest person, would you say?
75% fit within that category.
They're twice as likely to be neglected, 3 times as likely to be physically abused, 5 times as likely to be killed, and 9 times as likely to be sexually abused.
The 15,000 children, you said Arizona alone.
Yes.
Out of that 15,000, what percentage would you say actually become adopted, and what happens to those who are not adopted?
50% are returned home. The other 50% either get adopted or get shuffled around. Those kids are really at risk because they have to learn to fend for themselves. They deal with abusive people. They deal with abusive staff. The group homes really don't care about them. It's a disaster. And as they grow up, because they don't have anyone that really cares about them at this point, that they're at risk to become more involved with drugs,
Street
alcohol,
life.
prostitution,
Yes.
right, high school dropouts, and then you just create the problem.
Yeah, they say the majority of prison inmates are foster children.
Yes.
So
Yes,
they were
they
railroad
are.
there. It isn't a quick fix at all, but it can be fixed when people start recognizing what is going on. And we appreciate your work, Arizona Project. This brought out an awareness, and I really thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes. And I hear you had a run-in with CPS, is that true?
Yes.
One word, tell me what would sum up the experience you had with CPS.
Horrifying.
Horrifying. How old are you?
I am 12.